We need we need to adopt the agenda.
So we adopt the agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We also need the approval of the minutes from our last meeting, if you were able to go through those. Did anybody have corrections or anything to add or subtract? So can we have a motion for approval of the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. All right. This next public comment is an opportunity for the public to comment on any public matter that is not on the agenda of the meeting and is within the jurisdiction of the Teachers Retirement Board. However, the board may not take action on any issues raised unless it's included in the agenda and public comment has been allowed. If issues are raised that would require board action, the issue would need to be included on the agenda for a future meeting. Public does not include disability applications or contested cases and other adjudicative proceedings. Don't see a lot of public here, so we will move on. We are to the Executive Director's Report.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. To start out with, I'd like to give the board an update on a couple of our staffing changes that have occurred since our last meeting. Kristen Williams actually has fit in so well, I forgot to write her up in here. I'd only put John Noble, but at the October meeting, the board approved an additional benefit officer, and Kristen formally worked for TRS for a few years, and she rejoined TRS in October and has picked up right where she left off, and she is right there in this office. You remember Kristen probably from a few years back.
Her hair is a different color.
And then secondly, and I did write this part up, we did receive 36 applications for the IT manager position at TRS. We had an interview panel consisting of myself, Tammy, Denise, Rex, and the state CIO, Ron Baldwin. He sat in on the interview panel with us, and we chose John Noble, who is he's been in the governor's office as an IT manager and computer systems analyst for the past 6 years, or since 2006, excuse me. So 9 years, and then prior to that, he was an IT manager in the private sector for 14 years. So John's first day will be next Monday, December 7th. We're looking forward to having him on board here.
Good.
Sean, I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay, sorry. I was just giving
Thank
the
you.
update about John Noble.
Yeah, I heard it kind of. Okay. I'm okay.
All right, great. And then item B is the SAVA update. The State Administration and Veteran Affairs. It's that one.
It's this one.
Interim committee met on November 17th. At which I presented the results of our latest evaluation. There were relatively few questions from the committee. The only sort of resounding question and concern that continues is the fact that our benefit payments are more than our contributions if you just compare them 1-to-1, which is typical of a mature defined benefit plan. I mean, you build assets at the beginning of the plan life. You know, you don't have hardly any retirees. Everyone's putting in. You build a big pool of assets, and it's implicit or implied that you're going to spend down some of those assets in the future. But with the way the actuarial rate assumption works, as long as we continue to receive close to the 775, we'll continue to add to the bottom line. Our overall assets will continue to outpace, you know, how much we're pulling it down. So overall, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of interest in looking at any type of significant pension reform from the legislature, at least this far into the interim. Hopefully that continues. I think we're on pretty solid footing, and everyone seemed to be satisfied with the results of the valuation. Okay, then are there any questions about the SAVA update? On Monday, or no, Tuesday, December 8th, the Legislative Finance Committee will be meeting. I am actually out of the office all next week, so Denise is going to present the results of the valuation to the LFC. We're required to present to both LFC and SAVA in statute. In fact, if we don't present the actuarial report to the LFC committee, as soon as possible after the valuation. We risk losing up to $5 million of the $25 million that the state transfers to TRS each year. So it's important that we do that. Denise is going to cover for me on next Tuesday, and she will present the exact same presentation that I presented. Okay, next on the list is the draft board communication policy, and I included a marked up version of the policy in your packet. And there were only a couple of questions, but I think it's important that we have all these questions resolved before we do anything different with the communication policy, because I don't want you to think that you're prohibited from talking to anyone about anything related to TRS. And it seems like, based on the questions, that there could be some, possibly you're unsure about exactly what this policy means. And I think there is a little bit stronger language proposed in this policy than what's currently out there. This is just an attempt to improve our policy. It's not absolutely required. The old policy is fine. We've operated under it for several years. If there is resistance to change a few of these things, we certainly can either revise it or just leave the policy as it sits. So the questions are in purple, and starting at the top there, and maybe Denise, if you want to go through the couple of questions and speak to what our interpretation of it is versus the question at hand.
Sure. And first of all, I want to say, as you know, I reminded you all the first time we looked at reviewing and potentially revising this policy, that this is purely a tool for you. This is not anything that anybody else is going to hold you to. This is a tool for the board, and how much detail you think you need to have in it is certainly up to you. So the first question regarding individually, and the comment is that that's not needed. It's not there now. It truly is not mandatory. It was added just to make it clear that what we're talking about here is individual board members having conversations or providing information about TRS business. But if you're more comfortable with it not being there, that's absolutely fine. I'm sorry.
Do we want to discuss each of these as we go through and make a decision, or do you want to wait till the end?
I think we should.
I think we should discuss them as we go along.
Yeah, I think so too, because then we won't. How do you feel about the individually? It doesn't.
I'm fine with it being there.
It's repetitive.
I was going to circle it and write redundant, but
Oh, yeah.
that's the English teacher in me. Mm.
I just think people need it.
I think it's stated plainly in the first part of it.
All right.
So we'll
Take that out?
Delete that out.
Delete
of it.
that.
Okay.
That's what most people feel.
So the second comment there, the second highlighted, purple lavender highlighted section is added language that says, and this is the standard for board action and conduct. The only official action taken by the board is taken by the board as a whole. It as well probably doesn't necessarily need to be here. I just, it seems to me that it's sort of the premise of the whole rest of the communication policy, and that it's a reasonable inclusion. But again, the policy doesn't lose anything if it's gone.
I like it there. It needs to be somewhere in the document, and that's a good place to put it.
And where else is this located? I mean, it's in our policies elsewhere? I mean, we know that this is a general knowledge item. Where
exactly.
is it?
It really isn't anywhere.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
it just is, the standard legal sort of understanding of board action. You have a quorum for a reason. You have a majority action for a reason. And, legally it would certainly be understood that an individual member does not have authority to take action on behalf of the board unless the board has granted that authority to them. Again, this is a tool for you. but it really isn't stated anywhere
Yeah,
else.
let's leave it in there.
I would like to leave this in here.
It's not a big deal.
Anybody else have any other?
The reason for the question was, we're talking about a communications policy, and it just seemed like that's a
Exactly.
given regardless.
Exactly.
Whether it's communications or anything else.
Well, my question was, where else is this? And I
Yeah,
guess
it
if
should-
it's not.
I mean,
you know.
should obviously be a part of business with everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so that part we'll leave in there, is that the
Yeah,
consensus?
let's
Okay.
leave that in.
Yes.
All right, the next highlighted section there, so the question is about lobbying efforts. And just to be clear on lobbying issues. Once again, and I think it's always been the practice of this board, it certainly has been in my experience, that the board determines its position on legislative proposals, and whoever is acting on behalf of the board, whether it's a board member who goes to the legislature and testifies, is representing the official position of the board. Aside from that, you are all individuals in the United States of America, and you always have the right to go and lobby the legislature, including, frankly, on an issue pertaining to the retirement system. It should be clear, if you lobby the legislature, that a position you take that has not been adopted by the board is your personal position and not a position of the TRS board as a whole. I'm highly doubtful that there would ever be a difference of opinion on the issues, but this is one of those things that, frankly, other public retirement systems have had to deal with recently, is board members who lobbied for, doing away with the defined benefit plan, whatever the case may be. Not a position taken by the board as a whole, but taken by that member personally. And so, no, this does not prevent you from lobbying. It doesn't prevent you from lobbying on behalf of the retirement system. It doesn't prevent you from lobbying in your own behalf. The standard just should be, when you are speaking in your own personal interests, make that clear in the legislative committee or whatever the forum is for your testimony. Is that, I don't know if that answers the question.
There has been,
I think the reason for the question, more than anything else, is it just seems like the statement, in my mind, and maybe that's the problem, it just seems like the statement is trying to restrict what a board member might say to somebody, and I bring up lobbying primarily because of, at least in my experience as a board member, a vast majority of the discussions that we've had, whether it be lobbying or not, have been about issues that there isn't a board position on.
Right.
And so now we have to have a position to talk about it? Well, that's exactly what it says. So that concerns me a little bit. The other part of it is it just seems like we want a policy that guides board members' discussion as opposed to, and clarifies what those should be, but this seems to be restrictive in my mind. So that's the only reason why I put
And
that in there.
I would not have seen that, so I'm glad you pointed that out, because now I see where you're coming from on that. Can we, because your explanation, can we be more specific as to really say, board members, is that where it could go? To say, you have the right to.
Sure, and I guess
I think Scott's concern is not with the legislation that we have official action.
No, it's not with the stuff.
It's with the
It's with the
legislation
stuff
that we don't necessarily have
that
enough
we don't
official-
necessarily.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's going on out there that we don't always have a position on.
Right.
Right, because this is the part of the policy where you may generally describe the official position, and you're worried about if we don't have an official position.
It seems restricted.
Yeah.
I understand your point, Scott, because that happens in the legislature all the time. It would seem to me if it's a tremendous switch from the way the TRS board has been moving, that we should have a conference call on it. I know things happen fast over there, and that doesn't that won't happen all the time. But if a position is such an extreme difference from what we've already discussed and voted on, then I think we need to confer.
Well, it's not that at all, Maryland. It's that we haven't discussed it or even thought about it in many cases. So there's nothing really to have a conference call about because we don't know what it is. And a lot of times, you know, the concern that I have with this individual statement, it's under a section that's titled what a board member may talk about. And if that's all a board member may talk about, then 80% of what potentially is out there in terms of communications is gone. If an individual member calls you and wants to know why coaches aren't allowed to do this or why this isn't allowed to do that, we don't have official positions on some of that stuff. And so does that mean then we're going to refer every question we get to the staff? I think there are some logical comments or discussions that we can have, be it lobbying or discussions with individual members, that don't fall within that statement. And this makes it appear like that's what we should be talking about. And if we adopt this, that, you know, that we might not, maybe we shouldn't be having some conversations that we might be having now.
And I think if you look at the beginning of that revised language, actually all of this language was added to sort of loosen up what I perceived to be a fairly severe restriction on the communications you could have, and to specifically, you know, to clarify that the board can provide general information regarding the governance of the retirement system. It's precisely those questions that people bring to you, that you have a very good understanding of the position of the retirement system and the retirement board on how those things are handled, and we have complete faith that where your knowledge ends or is incomplete, you will refer people to us, but we don't expect you not to have those conversations with people. So, I mean, we can change the language. This really was an effort to go the other direction rather than...
Well, and just, I mean, obviously, if there is an official position, we're going to describe that position. But in the cases of issues we have not yet discussed, board members have the, you know, responsibility, right? I don't know, to what?
Yeah,
To speak on behalf of their own.
Maybe it just
Right,
needs
individually.
another line in there that speaks to
Yeah.
other issues. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it just seems to
Because I didn't
cut
read it,
off.
the position, I didn't read that. I was thinking our position instead of the position. So
Yeah.
that's the way I read it.
Scott, what kind of language would you envision?
Well, I would either remove that, or I would talk about, you know, other potential issues that could be out there that maybe have been on the table at some point in time or not, or questions that board members may get. Generally, as board members, there are times when we lobby before the legislature, but that's a very minor, I mean, staff, for the most part, manages all of those kinds of things. But there are a lot of things that are not pending legislation that board members get asked about, or is the board going to take a position, or is, you know, what are your feelings about this, that, or whatever, and it just seems to be in a scenario where we're talking about what a board member may represent himself or do, and if it's in there, it seems restrictive to me.
But it specifically says pertaining to pending legislation.
Correct. So are we not to talk about anything else?
Well, I think up above, at least the way I read it, you know, you can refer individuals to the statutes, administrative rules, and policies that govern the retirement system. I think some of the other items that you're citing as examples that might be covered ahead of that one, but
Could be.
So the other thing we could do is we could move this idea down to the board member may not, and make it very specific that with respect to legislation where the board has determined a position, that's the position that you will represent And, you know, again, that means not to your wife, not to your next door neighbor. You certainly have the right to.
And I think that makes more sense. I
Okay.
mean, if that's truly the goal, that's probably where it needs to be at.
Yeah.
I guess, but I know in the past couple legislatures, I've seen, you know, other board members where they'll come in and testify on a bill as a individual, you know, and they'll make it clear they're not
Sure.
providing testimony on behalf of the board, but it's contrary to what the rest of the board, you know, voted to do on that legislation. So you don't, I mean, I don't, whatever we write, you don't want to make it so restrictive that you as an individual, if there's 5 board members that
Right.
feel one way and
Enough.
one feels another, that one still should have the right to go up and testify, but obviously it won't be on behalf of the board, it'll be on their own.
And that would be the
Merits.
language that I would add if we moved it down, would be that, you know, you don't take lobby essentially, or take official positions on behalf of the board. You make it clear that any testimony that's not, you know, the position the board has voted on is your own.
Correct.
I think we
So-
can,
That would be good, because I
Down like
think
that.
that's, now that it's
Yeah.
covering, that's more of a,
okay?
How does this fit when the legislative committee, which is 2 members of the board, help make a decision on the fly about something new that the rest of the board has never seen before?
I think that probably gets back to Marilyn's comments about, you know, typically those things are not changes of position. I don't, I mean.
Generally, they're not. Or generally, you know, it's a committee where the executive director is asking, what do you think? Should we take this to the board? Should we have that meeting, or is this?
conference calls come into play.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the impact of the legislation. You know, there are certainly some bills that I think just, you know, and which we ran into a few of those last session. We sort of quickly were able to determine between the executive committee, or the legislation committee, and myself that either we're going to be neutral or we're going to oppose, or, you know, but it's pretty evident usually, but I think if it's any sort of drastic change at all, we probably would need to schedule a conference call vote and discussion with the rest of the board.
Makes sense.
Unfortunately, I've only been through one session here at TRS, so Scott, you may be able to speak to, I mean, occasionally I suppose
There's
you've
been
had
times
to.
when we've needed to pull
Sometimes
everybody.
that goes so fast.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking about, there could be even a chance that you wouldn't have time for a conference call.
Occasionally, at least for the first hearing, but you'll be able to catch up to it by the second
Yeah.
hearing, yeah. Sometimes they'll wait till right at the deadline to introduce the bill and then schedule a hearing right away, but
It's pretty rare, though.
it is,
actually.
yeah, it's usually, well, they're usually budget related, sometimes we fall in.
But a lot of times, the 2013 legislation was a classic example where there was some language that changed right at the end.
Oh, yeah.
You know, just
Yep.
might have completely changed the intent of the board.
So, I'm sorry, are we ready to move
Yeah,
on
I
to the
think so.
final highlighted issue? So this is the provision that says that with respect to contested matters, or, you know, members who have specific issues that are before the board for decision, or are likely to come before the board for decision. I don't know how frequently it ever happens that, you know, somebody comes up to you and says, here's my personal circumstance, and I think I'm entitled to, you know what maybe never.
Yeah.
But this is, and the comment is, ever, and clarify, and so this is not supposed to limit your, again, I think back to Scott's comments before about why coaches can't do certain things, the kinds of comments and questions and general, you know, even dissatisfaction with the positions the retirement system has taken, that people are coming, if it is not a specific issue. If it's a subject, the rest of the policy applies. If it is a specific issue of a specific member where they can or they have or they're likely to end up before the board in a contested case matter, this is really the circumstance where it's most important that you not, I mean, you can still talk about the subject with the person, but you can't tell them what the right answer is, what the outcome is going to be, what position the board's going to take on it, that sort of thing. I think that it's, you know, Carrie is kind of shaking her head like, I think it's an issue of common sense, essentially. I don't expect that you would do it. It's just one of those, this is the circumstance where you're going to potentially conflict yourself out of taking official action on a matter if you have already consulted with the person or talked with the person about the issue that they will be bringing before the board. So,
And I can think of cases that have happened in my own school district where, had they come to me ahead of time and talked to me about it, I would not have been able to, you know, even I feel like had I just known more about it, I would not have felt okay voting with
we
that.
have in the past, in fact, had board members say, I know this person, I've talked to them about this issue, they work in my school, I'm aware of the circumstance, whatever the case may be, where we have put on the record a conflict of interest and they've not been part of formal action on the issue. So that's what this is intended to go to, again, not preventing the sort of subject conversations and that I'm sure you're involved in all the time.
It just seems like a statement that could be a lot simpler. It seems like it's talking around a lot of things and doesn't really say what you're intending. And I guess that's why I made the statement clarified. There are lots of issues that come before the board, you know, and a lot of them don't have anything to do with, you know, or speculate or talk about, you know, matters before the board. So I guess I just like to see a clear statement about, you know, when there's a pending issue or when whatever, you just need to recognize the confidentiality of what's going on here.
And that's sort of, the talking around is sort of, in this circumstance, Scott, I think necessary, because that's the thing. We have cases where you already understand that the issue has come to TRS staff, we've issued a staff determination, they now have the right to appeal before, we strictly speaking have a contested case in hand. There are other circumstances where that hasn't occurred yet, but you know, you're going to have to judge the circumstances and sort of decide whether this is something that will likely come before the board as a whole. And you might, you know, even guess wrong from time to time. You might have the conversation with somebody that after the fact you decide conflicts you from participating in the official action, and that's fine. I mean, that's not...
Well, I think if you put statements in there like to prevent conflicts of, you know, of whatever in this, I think that helps in this discussion. This is a pretty wide open statement.
Yeah.
The way it's written, and it doesn't, you know, I think back, I can come up with, and I know Carrie can too, a dozen things that have come before the board that are long since done.
Sure.
And, you know, the general position of you know, the reason why we have changed some laws as a result of some of these cases. Well, I understand the need for confidentiality and all of that, but to say that, you know, that we're never going to talk about something when in fact it's over and done with, and the laws have been changed, this seems to limit all of that. And I don't know that it would ever be included in a individual board member communication. Again, this seems to be something that's, if it was more specifically written to address, I think, what your concerns are, it wouldn't appear to
I guess
to cover everything.
The one thing I think we should maybe consider as well is, under the May section, we have generally described the official position of the board has taken in contested case matters, but only in matters that are fully concluded.
Right.
And it should say, and no longer pending with the board.
Anything
So
like
that's
that.
May, I mean, that's the part that May, I mean.
I think the intent of the statement is well and good, but I think it needs to be specific to the things that we're talking about here.
Does getting has been
That's-
or out of this purple statement here
Yeah.
take care of that because of what Sean said is under the may?
I think the or maybe is the part I would want to delete, because how do you know when you're first approached that it may be brought?
So how about if we say which is pending or may be brought before the board? I truly believe that or may be brought before the board is, we can take it out and just say you all understand where that line is drawn, and so it doesn't need to be stated, but as a concept for board communications, I think it's imperative that you understand that you're going to have circumstances, in all likelihood, those of you who are in schools, in any case, where people are going to want to talk to you about their personal situations, about their friend's situation. They're going to, want to convince you of their position, etc. And you're going to have to make some judgment calls about how far you. Now, clearly, if somebody comes to you and says, look, I'm retired from a public school district and I'm going to work for the university system and I think I'm entitled to receive my, we've been through Merle Ferrier 5 times. You're going to clearly tell somebody.
I wasn't going to name that. But.
I wasn't going to say his.
I'm sorry. It's just how I refer to the issue, right?
Well, it is the issue.
Well,
It's
that
on-
is the issue.
It's on.
And we certainly don't expect you not to clarify for somebody, look, that, that issue has been litigated. The statutes are very clear. You cannot be receiving retirement benefits from TRS and be participating in the university retirement system.
Yeah, that's a very clear scenario, and there's 4 or
Right.
5 other ones that
Sure.
are much like
Sure.
that. So I think Sean's solution might.
I like.
And I don't have the or brought part.
Well,
It's the
maybe.
has been.
I just even think
Yeah,
is.
it has been.
It's the
Yeah,
has
I like
been
the
that
I like the
frustrates
is
me.
pending, because
I think
even
it's
if it's
pending, too,
pending
now that-
towards somebody's individual benefit, I mean, if any of it only comes to staff and not to the board,
Right.
that's an issue, and that is pending may not be brought before the board, but may be taken care
And I
of
think
here.
it's clear that, if something were to come to us and we were to discuss it and look at this later, I'm going, oh, man. I need to recluse myself
Yeah,
from all of this because I have already
Right.
Yeah.
messed this up.
Right.
But, so I think that clarifies for me what the intent is, and
I like the is pending.
And just getting back to your, Scott's statement about why we're, that one of the additions to the purpose section up above is that, the objective of this communication policy is to keep you out of situations that create or appear to create a conflict of interest and preclude you from, acting in your official capacity. So I think if you read it as a whole, I mean, I'm hoping that the purpose sort of softens the edges of some of the specifics, because that's sort of the whole point. This isn't cut and dry. You're going to have to exercise judgment. We don't expect you not to talk to people about what you do on behalf of TRS. In fact, we expect you to do that. So,
Well, we want these statements to be meaningful to
Right.
you, and I think
Right.
we're talking about a gray area that's
Yeah.
really hard to put your finger on sometimes.
Sometimes,
You're gonna get,
Well, because that's something we do deal with.
right.
Oh, yeah.
On a, not a daily basis, but yearly.
Yeah.
so if we add the is pending, are we
Sure.
good with that?
Did you still want to get the has been out of there?
Yeah, I want to get that. The has been
Yeah,
is the issue.
has
for
been
me.
will be taken out, and it will say which is pending or may be brought before the board.
Yeah. And that's the whole reason why I put ever there.
And you're okay, I mean, everyone's okay with discuss his or her personal opinion of the matter or issue? I mean, even
Yes.
Especially with the is pending. I mean, I
I think the is pending solves that problem.
think it does too.
I don't have a problem with
Which
the
is
rest of it.
pending For the board for determination.
Not the has stuff.
Okay.
We've, that has created an opinion for us, the has-been stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's covered. Here, once it's, at least a
Yeah.
contested case matter, once it's been through the process, we can generally describe the official action.
So the last comment there is querying whether there are not cross-references to this. This sort of gets back to Carrie's question before about is this, where else is this written down at?
Yeah.
The reality is that this policy is sort of about fiduciary duties and ethical responsibilities, and to be perfectly honest with you, there really isn't a cross-reference. I mean, our other board policies on ethical conduct, which, coincidentally, we're going over
But I do
today
think
anyway.
that is a cross-reference, though, Denise.
You-
As is the law on our fiduciary responsibilities. I think that
Yeah.
ties into this, and I think
There's
for board members, in my mind, if I want to go through and reinforce some of the statements that are in this policy, it's the cross-references that I turn to. Where else have I seen this? It's the exact question that Carrie asked.
Right.
This is not just about communications, this is about being a member of the board
Yeah.
and doing my job and all of that stuff. So in my mind, I think there should be some cross-references that we can
So
access.
here is the thing then, the primary cross-reference for this would be whatever source there is that describes your fiduciary duties. The reality is that there is no statute that describes fiduciary duties for public pension trustees. We're not subject to ERISA, we're not subject to the state provisions on fiduciary duties that apply to trustees in general. It more is the training that we have annually, and we have in fact not reduced your fiduciary duties to a policy statement either. So the question is, we can cross-reference the ethics policy, but again, that's sort of a step removed. And I don't know, if you want to do something more substantial with fiduciary duties, we certainly could do that. But, otherwise we could just reference board fiduciary duties. It's not really a cross-reference to a document, a law, a policy, an administrative rule, anything along those lines. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, that I would recommend trying to cement your fiduciary duties in a policy.
Is there,
Well, but there are policies that we have that are tied to our fiduciary duties. And those are the kinds of cross-references that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Things like our,
Privacy, ethics.
yeah,
Yep.
the confidentiality,
Right.
the other side of this that relates is our position on funding. That all ties to all of this.
is it in statute, for official action of the board, you have to have a quorum? Is that cited in statute anywhere? Because you could cite that. I mean, that sort of speaks to some of these things about speaking as an individual, but I don't know if it is.
It is not.
It's not in statute.
It's not. Well, I mean, it's certainly in statute that official action of the board requires a quorum of quorum of our board is 3 members, and so official action requires an affirmative vote from 3 members.
So we could cite that statute.
We can. We also have, of course, and so the big one, of course, is the constitutional provision that says, as board members of TRS, you're acting as fiduciaries of members and their beneficiaries. So I will cross-reference that as well.
That's a good one.
So I will add the cross-references.
It's interesting that there's nothing in statute or like around the state or anything, because when we go to these trainings elsewhere, that's what we're warned about most, is that fiduciary responsibility.
Yeah, and there are fiduciary duties in statute in Montana in the trust provisions, Title 72 of the Montana Code, but board members of public retirement systems are expressly accepted from the application of Title 72.
Well,
So those don't technically apply to you, of course. as we've talked in our training, ERISA has specific duty of loyalty, duty of care, it has specific fiduciary duties. We're not subject to ERISA either, although we certainly look at those requirements and you know, understanding what our fiduciary duties are. There's certainly common law, but there is nothing specific to cross-reference as far as your express fiduciary duties are concerned.
And it would be different in other states.
Yes,
Okay,
it is
that makes
different in
sense
other
then.
states.
All right.
So, Madam Chair, I guess what I would propose then is we will get these edits made and the references inserted, and I'll send it out early for everyone for feedback. And as long as we can come to a consensus, I think next board meeting, would everyone be comfortable with the language as we have proposed? And then we'll include cross-references. Would everyone be comfortable with it going on the docket for approval?
Sure.
I would, yeah. And Scott, thank you for taking the time to make those comments, because I didn't even see some of those things, so.
Well, and rather than, and Scott got me his comments pretty close right after the meeting, but rather than trying to do this discussion via email, I thought it would be
Yeah.
important, because really, like Denise said, this is a tool for you,
Mhm.
and it's more important that you as board members understand what it means than it is for staff, because you're the ones that need to use it. So, I think it was useful.
Thank you. So there's some time for public comment here. Thank you for coming, as always. Have anything to say?
Pleasure to be here.
We love having public. And so the privacy and security,
Yes.
personal information.
So, Madam Chair, in front of the board, for executive action is the adoption of the privacy and security of personal identifying information policy. We noticed this policy and discussed it at our October 1st board meeting. The revisions to the policy, there were no additional edits. In October, that was the second time we actually reviewed the policy. So this being the third time with no edits in October, staff is looking for approval of the updated policy.
I would make a motion to approve the policy.
Second. It's been moved and seconded to approve the privacy and security of personal identifying information policy. Is there any further discussion about this? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of the policy indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye.
Do you want me to?
Sure.
Okay. And then item F on your agenda is the tuition reimbursement program. We initially reviewed this program in August at our board meeting. There were several revisions and comments made during that meeting, which were incorporated into an updated draft for our October 1st meeting. There were no additional revisions suggested to the program in October, and so we have this in front of the board for formal approval. Once the program itself is approved, I think that Denise and I have been talking about this. I think then we probably need a policy, a short policy that, that basically states that the board has a tuition program that we'll bring forward at our next meeting. And then, of course, starting in May of 2016, we would look at setting aside some funds in our budget for potential users of the program. And I think that at that point, you can sort of make a decision about what level the board wants to fund this at. The possible dollar amounts per individual are set in the program as it's written, but we haven't really had much discussion about, overall, how much is the board willing to invest in this training for staff. But we can do that, I think, more clearly when we set the budget for May, for the fiscal year 17 in May, excuse me.
Okay. So we need a motion to.
Could we look at page 6 for a moment, please?
Sure.
I think it must be a typo, or I'm just not thinking. On the first item on the top of page 6, eligible expenses, that sentence, that item, on the third line of it in the brackets, except for books which are not reimbursable under this program, up to a maximum of $3,500 each fiscal year. That's not plain to me. What does that mean?
Well, I think what it means is, if you're a full-time employee, it's up to 35, you're eligible to receive up to 3,500 per fiscal year, but I see what you mean about the way it's written.
Yeah, because if it's in brackets, it should probably just refer to the books.
The
Right.
bracket
So
just
I-
needs to be moved up to
Exactly.
reimbursement.
I think it's just probably when you're typing it, you know how sometimes things jump around. I think probably something happened.
Right, I think I could move, so where it says C or lower grade, I could move up to a maximum of 3,500 each
There you go.
fiscal
Yeah,
year.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's probably happened.
Up
There's
there.
one more like that, and it's towards the bottom of the page, just above retention policy.
Okay,
The sentence, payments to employees under this program limited to reimbursement for eligible expenses paid by the employee TRS. Something's missing
it's
there.
a period.
Period.
Period, TRS will not pay.
Okay, there we go. Okay.
You're exactly
I figured
right.
it was just typos.
So
Thanks.
I guess what I'll do then is I'll move right behind grade up there at the top, up to a maximum of 3,500 each fiscal year, then we'll start the brackets, except for books which are not reimbursable under this program,
Period.
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 Or, and bracket.
And bracket then, period, yes.
That worked.
Okay, thank you.
Makes sense, Marilyn, thank you. All right, so can we have a motion on this reimbursement program?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the tuition reimbursement program? Is that correct? All right.
With the adjustments mentioned.
Thank you, with the adjustments mentioned. Any other comments, any further comments? Okay. All those in favor of this program indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Marilyn, we're on to your investment report.
Yes, and I really dropped the ball this month, and I didn't go back and look like I intended to do. But generally speaking, you can see Sean has included the returns and the costs in the last month and quarter, et cetera. And if you turn to that State Street report, and teachers' retirement would be on the second page of it. Our last month was much better than we've seen. We've not had a good year at this point, and the quarter was bad. But we had a good last month, and I haven't seen the numbers for November yet. The one thing, as we all talked about in the past, the market goes up and down, and we can't overreact. Generally speaking, we are well diversified. Our new CIO, Joe Cullen, felt that there's no reason to make any changes, that abilities take time to play out, and we just need to be where we are right now with slight adjustments, but no changes. And in addition to that, we spent a lot of time in the last meeting talking about how we compare our returns to our peers and to benchmarks that are established. And there are 3 or 4 different types of benchmarks. When we compare with our peers, we are still doing better than our peers and are taking less risk to get slightly more return. So in reviewing all of that, we are, as bad as the quarter has been, we are doing okay. Everything is still moving along as it should. Sean gave an excellent report to the Board of Investments from our actuary results. And I think that is all I wanted to talk about, unless someone has specific questions.
Marilyn, I do. Tell me about the new CIO.
Yes.
Who is the new CIO?
I'm sorry. His name is Joe Cullen. He comes to us from Amherst, Massachusetts. In fact, he was involved with the Amherst Foundation from the university there for some time. He worked for private enterprise after that. Then he had a 2-year agreement after he left private enterprise not to compete, and that 2-year agreement ended in June. So he was available then to take on a new interest. It was surprising that he and his wife would move all the way from the East Coast, since that's always where they've lived. But he's very excited about being here. He's an open man, easy to talk to. Staff seems to be settling in with him just fine. David Sen is very, or David, not Sen. I am groggy this morning. Please forgive me. Everything seems to be going smoothly at this point. It's too early to really make an evaluation, but he's a very nice man and easy to listen to. He explains things extremely well.
Well, thank you. I just hadn't heard, so. Thanks, Marilyn.
Uh-huh.
We're on to financial statements, Nolan.
Members of the board, trust everyone had a good Thanksgiving. So I'm be pretty brief. There's no surprises in any of the investment, or I'm sorry, the financial statements. Starting on page 32, as Member Ryan explained, that returns are down year over year. The good news is they're still positive a little bit. So we do have security gains, but they're significantly less than the previous year. So our total investment revenue is down from this point last year. And I guess if anyone has questions throughout, feel free to speak up. We'll move on to the fund balance statement on page 33. Obviously, our benefits paid continue to go up as expected, which increases. So therefore, our total expenses increase by roughly that same amount year over year, and our revenue over expenses. Since we have less revenue, more expenses, our revenue is more negative, I guess, than it was the previous year. However, our total assets continue to gain in appreciation, so because of the positive returns. So our total, I guess on page 34, you can see that our total investments are, have increased year over year because of the, positive returns. So our appreciation continues to go up, but just the returns themselves are down in comparison to this time last year, and especially from 2013, which was a significant, well, I guess fiscal year 14 was a significant year for returns. So some of the things that I guess I point out on page 34 on the balance sheet, and I think I pointed this out last time, but I think M-Trust has allowed the accounting unit to decrease our accounts receivable and our accounts payable significantly. Our accounts receivable this time last year were sitting at about $14,000, and they're under $1,000 now, and our accounts payable, which just kind of, I guess, these things just kind of help our cash flow, and you can purchase STIP and get just a little fraction of a percentage more return, for our members. So those are good. The other points, I guess, are due to GASB 68. You'll see some new line items, I guess, and I should have moved this down. I realized from the CAFR that actually these pension deferred outflows and pension deferred inflows should actually be below total assets and total liabilities. So I'll make that change for next board meeting or the next financials that are produced. But right now, the pension deferred outflows and the net pension liability, that will stay as a liability, obviously, and then the pension deferred inflows are kind of new line items, and I think they were there at the August board meeting as well, but so I probably pointed them out at that time, but relatively new, so. And our total fund balance have increased year over year, which is always a good thing. Any questions on the financial statements?
Can you remind me what the pension deferred outflows and inflows are?
Yeah, it's
Nutshell.
kind of a complicated. So, due to the GASB 68, there was several changes that went into place, and one of the significant changes is that it takes basically there's different items that are, I guess, depreciated over 4 years, or not depreciated, but amortized. There you go, over like 4 years or 5 years, and you can only recognize like a portion of it as pension expense in the first year, and the rest gets deferred, and those will layer on top of each other every year. And Sean can jump in if he needs to, but the difference between expected and actual experience, I believe, is one of them. There's some that have the difference between expected and actual contributions. See, these are pension expense, and pension deferred inflows and outflows are associated with our membership in the PERS plan. So these aren't actually the TRS plans, because those actually get passed down to our employers. So our GASB 68 information actually goes out to all of our employers, and they have to report it on their financial statements, where we get information from PERS plan, because we're all the employees here are members of PERS, and so those deferred inflows and outflows and pension expense and the net pension liability, all that is associated with our membership in the PERS plan. And so I know it's really complicated without getting into the weeds, and we've spent several months figuring this, years basically figuring this stuff out. I mean, obviously, we've had a lot of training and help on that stuff. So I don't know if I explained that very well, but our membership in the PERS plan is where these numbers come from, and at this time, this is where they'll layer on top of each other, and next year we'll see changes in the deferred inflows and outflows and pension liability.
Could you put PERS in parentheses after those two items
Absolutely.
Just to keep keeping you remember that?
It gets, whoops, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So Nolan, on a school district's budget, then they would have similar numbers reflecting
For TRS.
TRS for their employees.
Correct.
Actually,
As well as PERS,
PERS,
because
because
they do
the-
have
right.
certain employees that are
Okay, just so when I see that there, I'll have a clue what that is.
right.
yeah, another thing I was going to point out, it does get confusing. In our CAFR, we talk about the teacher's retirement net pension liability and GASB 68 requirements in part of it, and then we have to disclose our participation in PERS and our NPL and deferred inflows and outflows, and it does get confusing because obviously the overall net pension liability and deferred inflows and outflows for TRS are much, much larger than these numbers. But it just gets a little bit confusing. All of our employees here participate in PRS, so we have to show our net NPL and deferred inflows, outflows on our balance sheet, just like the districts have to.
Okay, that makes sense.
So in our CAFR that you, as of 6/30/14, you would have seen the GASB 67 amounts that are associated with the TRS plan, and those are the large net pension liability that's associated with the system. And then that was distributed out or allocated based on employer contributions is how we allocated it. And that was what went out in GASB 68
Okay.
to all of our employers, that they had to put on their financials, or, you know, technically they're required to put it on there. I don't know. Once we send out the information, it's out of our hands as far as what they do with it. But
They
then
probably
in
don't
this
wanna
year's
put it on
CAFR,
there.
as of
Yeah.
6/30/15, you'll see
Oh, got it.
the 67 information, which is the plan information, as well as the 68 information, which is the PERS allocation to us of our liability associated with them. Is it clear as mud?
Yep, I got it.
Clear as mud.
But if anyone has any further questions, once you see the CAFR, it'll probably make more sense. And I'll give you a CAFR update here soon, briefly. But if they have any questions on the details of it, once you've seen the numbers, you can give me a call, or Sean and I can talk you through it. So, to the best of our ability. So moving on to the operating budget. There's not really any surprises on the operating budget either. You can see that we're, roughly 33%, or as of October 31st, roughly 33% through the fiscal year, and we've spent roughly 26% of our budget. So we're projecting a surplus at this time in operating expenses. And any questions on operating? And then the M Trust budget on page 36. And I think I spoke about this last time, but the AMDEC, tech systems, and the TRG, which are our tech writer and our test lead and our project manager, those expenses are likely to exceed the budgeted amount. However, our contingency, we've only spent 6% of our contingency, so I think we don't anticipate needing more budget for the interest project at this time, at least. So.
And this is not through fiscal year, this is through the whole project, right?
That's
Okay.
correct.
All
Yeah,
right.
this is for the whole project. That's how we decided. I think it was around this time last year to present this. Page 37 there just is, one of our major expenses is the consulting and professional services. So that's kind of breaks down each aspect of those, and there's really no surprises. Some of those are fixed costs that we pay all at once, and so those are the ones that have been paid 100%, and some of them are paid on a monthly basis. And if you have any questions, I can get into more detail, but as far as so the delinquent agency report, this was prepared as of the 3rd of November, and at this time, I just checked this morning, none of these schools are delinquent. They've all turned in their reports at this time, and actually there's no delinquencies for the October reports at this time. There is some stuff with RISAs and CSPDs that we need to iron out, but those are very small dollar amounts, and we don't anticipate any problems with them reporting. We just need to iron out some details. But
And you got the Lincoln clerk and recorder cleared up?
that individual is no longer working, and so
Yeah,
I
not really. We are working on that, though. We've sent a couple of different communications to all county superintendents, and we are figuring out what their status is. We're finding that a lot of counties have combined the elected county superintendent with the treasurer or the clerk of court. In some counties, it's all three. So the question becomes, who's doing the superintendent duties that you have to be certified to do. And some of them have answers to that. They've hired contractors, and if they're retirees, we're going to require working retiree contributions. Others sort of borrow the services of a superintendent in their district. They come fill it out and submit it for them. So we're working through all of those issues with each county, and hopefully, in the next 6 months or so, we'll be able to have at least either have everyone reporting someone or have a good understanding of why they're not. But it came to a
45
surprise.
and 56 are probably all different.
Yes, they are all different, and it came to as a surprise to some of them that the county superintendent is reportable to TRS, so, which is interesting.
And has to be certified.
Yes.
Yeah.
Both counts.
Yeah.
So, we are working through that though, and that sort of all stemmed from the issues we had with the Lincoln County superintendent. But the individual that previously was doing that, who was a retired TRS member, is no longer working in that capacity as a contractor. I think they've hired someone else, or they're in the process
Who
of
is
hiring.
going to be,
Who will be reported, yes. Yep.
Okay.
So, I guess that brings me to the, I would like to thank the board for sending me to the P2F2 conference, sunny San Diego, so that was nice weather. And, but I think the biggest thing that I get out of that is the networking opportunities. You get to meet, people that are in my position or roughly the same position that are all throughout the nation, and then you kind of get to put some names to faces that if I ever have questions about complicated things like GASB 68 or you can put that to the P2F2 members, and they respond individually, or they don't necessarily respond as a group, but in the same token, we've had, I think one of the things that I really got out of it is that we did a way above average job implementing GASB 68 for our employers. We went above and beyond as far as, they had a panel that I went to that discussed how they implemented, and it was like Utah, Colorado, I think Arizona or Phoenix. I'm not sure which, because some of these folks have cities that they actually do, which are bigger than Montana. But I think that out of that, I got that Utah was one of the only ones who did it like we, who implemented 68 like we did, where we actually sent out all the disclosures and the amounts associated for each employer that they could more or less just plug right into their comprehensive annual financial reports. And so I thought that was good to know that we, I think, went above and beyond what a lot of plans did throughout the nation. And then I guess there are more accounting standards. I don't really need to bore you with any of the details, but GASB continues to pump out more accounting standards, but some of them will be more applicable to like Board of Investments, because they deal with fair value, and then for state accounting, who manages the OPEB plan for us and gives us those amounts, and it sounds like that those are going to be more aligned with how the pension standards are now in GASB 68, so they'll be just allocating out the liability to all the employers, and very similar to GASB 68. So thank you again, and I'm sure I'll be asking again next year to attend. I think it's in South Carolina next year, so. The CAFR, just a brief update on the CAFR. The Legislative Audit Division has been here on site for the last 2.5 weeks. We received our first communications memo last week, which were very small changes from our draft CAFR that needed to be made. Some of them were grammatical errors, but no major changes, but we made those changes and have sent them, I guess, our second draft, or yeah, I'm not really sure what the formal term is for them, but they may be sending one more communication, which may change a few more things on the CAFR, but I don't anticipate very many changes at all. And then we're expecting an opinion, I believe, by next week or the following, so, but probably the following week. So then we will go to, once we get that opinion, we will go to print, and then we should be receiving it, and we'll get the CAFR turned in for the GFOA award. So, and that's due by the 31st. So it's kind of getting to crunch time. But a lot of the delays are, obviously LAD didn't, Legislative Audit Division didn't come in until just a couple weeks ago to start the audit. So.
Yeah, it's moving along relatively smoothly, actually.
Yeah.
So this year.
Good job.
That's all I had.
Thank you. Anybody have questions or comments for him? All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Tammy, we have an out-of-state travel request for we need an action item on this, or did I skip
Yeah,
something?
we're on the.
Oh, gosh, I really
annual
skipped a
conference
bunch.
report.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Next thing in the thing.
I don't really want to talk, but I can.
Go ahead.
Well, I guess I would ask Marilyn, do you want to start, or do you want me to on the NC?
You go ahead and start.
Okay.
I have a few things that I've written down, but go ahead.
Okay, great. So Marilyn and I both attended the NCTR annual conference in San Diego this year, and the theme of the conference was getting it right, and they spent quite a bit of time in the various panels talking about the ways defined benefit pension plans have done it right the past few years, and a lot of that has been tied to pension reform that sort of reined in the unfunded liabilities of systems. In 2014, there's this it's a 2015 report. It's called the Wilshire Report. But in 2014, 80% plans were funded across the nation at about 80% versus 74% in 13. Now, obviously, some of that is due to the stock market increase between 13 and 14, but as well, it's due to some of the pension reforms that were instituted across the country. Montana was not alone in having to do something about the unfunded liability of the system. Most states reined in or changed benefit structure, and they also increased contributions similar to what we did in Montana. So that's encouraging news. The state of public pension plans, according to Lee Snell, is strong right now. It sounds like Washington, and at least in his view, isn't probably going to get anything done until we have a change in administration. And then, of course, depending on how that change works, it may be deadlock again. It's hard to say, but there doesn't seem to be too much concern about federal legislation as compared to previous years. We should be seeing a GASB exposure draft related to GASB 68, which deals with pensionable compensation. The way the standard currently reads, and it's not really being enforced this way because as a group we have spoken out, pension systems don't collect the information they want. But GASB 68 would require the employers to report pensionable compensation as defined in 68. Let me put it that way. It includes everything. Now, of course, we have a definition of earned compensation, which does not include everything. There are certain bonuses, different things that aren't reportable to TRS, whereas the standard as it's currently written would require you to report those. And we, as a group across the nation, we've said, no, we're not going to change the way that we have employers report to the system. It's hard enough to get them to report the right things now. We don't want to change it. And so they are going to release an exposure draft and revert back to, for pensionable compensation, revert back to the definition as it was under 25, GASB 25, which is in compliance with how we currently collect that information. So that's good news. I think GASB had to come to the conclusion that no one could comply with it, with the standard, the way it was written in that regard. So I'm glad they backed off of that. You know, Lee did talk about, and for those of you that, I think, Dan, have you been to a trustee conference yet?
No.
Okay, but the rest of you are familiar with Lee Snell and who he is. But he every year provides, you know, an update of Washington and sort of the big moving pieces as they sit in D.C. right now. And, you know, one of the things, even though he's not too worried about specific pension reform coming from the federal level, there are ways that we could be affected, and most of them have to do with using pensions as a revenue offset. And he talked a little bit about mandatory Social Security would raise $81 billion over 10 years if the feds decided to do that. There is some thought about, you know, capping tax-deferred contributions to $20,000 per year, or 20% of income, which is estimated to raise $45.9 billion over 10 years. Repealed employer pickup is expected to raise $4.8 billion. That was a per year, I believe, and that was a 2005 estimate. So there are ways that we could end up, you know, being affected as a revenue offset in other legislation that comes down to like a must pass. And that, I think that's his fear that he always communicates to the NCTR group, is that even though it seems like smooth sailing, every time there's one of these must pass bills that really aren't related to pensions at all, but there's always there's a danger that you can get inserted into one of those bills, and because the rest of the bills need it so badly, you know, bad legislation can pass. So he's optimistic, but he said, you know, there's just things to be aware of. That's Lee Snell's update. Marilyn, do you want to chime in as we go, or do you want to do it at
No,
the
go
end?
ahead.
Okay, all right, great. Let's see. On the regulatory issues, similar to what Denise came back to her conference with, the normal retirement age regulations should be out at some point. We don't know. NCTR doesn't have any better idea of when that might be than the attorney group. They are working on them. They should be out at some point. We may have issues. We'll have to wait and see what they come out with related to return to work provisions and in-service distributions. I think that's going to be better defined, or at least Lee thought it will be better defined when those regulations actually come out. It seems like indications are, as long as you don't provide in-service distributions before age 62, you won't have any issue at all. But we'll really have to wait and see what those regulations say before we can move on anything. The definition of a government plan, in Lee's estimation, he doesn't think that's going to get accomplished before the change in administration. Whereas I think the group that Denise met with, NAPA, they thought that would be coming out in the next few months. So it's anyone's guess at this point. Let's see, figure out who the speaker is here. Okay, and then on the investment front, we had several investment speakers. The one thing that sort of resonated with me was Melody Hobson, and she's the Ariel Investment. I guess the message was you know, you have to keep the long-term view when it comes to investments. It's the only way really to be successful. And there's more challenges now than ever to sort of step away from the long-time view and go for the quick dollar, the high risk. And she said you really have to guard against that. And I think our Board of Investments and the way our asset allocation is determined, and the way that investment policy works, I think we're guarded to some degree against that, and hopefully we'll continue to keep the long-term view. There were a couple there was a section on IT security, and I'll just give you a couple of stats they threw out. And Amy Timmons from Hewlett-Packard said that, you know, 56 to 76% of organizations have been breached. It takes 229 to 242 days on average to discover the breach. So most often you you may be breached, have a data breach, and you don't even know it for almost a year. You know, it takes, you know, a month or more to repair a breach. It costs between these are averages, but $3.5 to $8.6 million is what it costs to sort of to fix the damage caused by a breach. 94% of all data breaches are found by a third party. They're not found by the application software. It's through third party assessment. So it's a really serious issue. You know, a few of the things they talked about that can help protect you against data breaches are, I mean, and this sounds sort of awful, but there is insurance that you can purchase to protect yourself against data breaches. And what that does basically is reduces and transfers part of the risk to the insurance company.
Part of the risk.
Right, part of the risk. I've never looked into that. They say it's relatively affordable. I don't know if that's a way or a direction the board would even be think about moving. I mean, we have risk management tort division here in Montana,
And we have
cybersecurity
cybersecurity coverage through them.
Through them, so that's what some of the, you know, I imagine these are cities and municipalities. Some of those folks, they're buying the insurance, which sounds like we're covered under that. One of the things they did say that they really recommend is conducting penetration testing at least annually, if not biannually, and we are doing that currently as a result of the M-Trust project. We've had 2 penetration tests conducted by Cerium in the last year and a half or so, and we have one more coming up likely next summer. But we may, you know, it sounds like one of the best practices is to continue that service at least on an annual basis, and so that's something that we should probably look at for the future once the M-Trust project is complete, is at least once a year have a third party like Cerium come in and do penetration testing. Everything we've done so far here at TRS has turned out just fine. They haven't found any, I don't know what the word is. We're not, yeah, but they haven't found any vulnerabilities at this point, so that's good news.
When I asked investments about the insurance, I was told that it's covered by the state as a whole.
Yes, and I think that's what Denise, what she just indicated as well. And I figured we were covered under risk management and tort, but it sounds like we do have cyber insurance as part of that. Let's see. I won't touch too much on there was a trustee panel, and there were several items they talked about. The one thing that sort of, you know, it's not funny, but it is, we share the same concerns as Colorado. Term limits there have really become a big issue. They spend a ton of their time educating the incoming legislators before every session, because term limits have resulted in so much turnover there, and there's not institutional knowledge as part of the legislature like there used to be. And we've experienced that to some degree here in Montana as well, I would say. I'll skip, I'll let Marilyn talk about the CIO panel if she wants to. There were a few good points there. The last thing I'd talk about was there was a benefit officer panel, and it was sort of interesting because these aren't, you know, these are people that are actually doing the benefits, similar to what Janelle, Kristen, and Bryn do, and it was nice to hear their perspective. It sounds like most states are similar to Montana in that one of the biggest challenges we face is effective education of our membership. There's a lot of effort certainly going on here at TRS, but it's similarly across the rest of the nation with these DB plans of how do you educate your membership, how do you get the information out more efficiently. You know, the newer members are more into mobile applications and interactive things, and then you still have, you know, a retired a large proportion of the overall memberships that are retired may not have internet access. So we're not unique in that regard, and they certainly talked about that. I guess that's about all I would like to touch on. I'd like to thank the board for sending me to NCTR, and like Nolan, I think the biggest value of that is the networking piece. In fact, when we were doing the GASB 68 disclosures, you know, we sort of had a few questions and we couldn't get some of them resolved, and it's nice to be able to pick up the phone and call the director of the Georgia Retirement System, Jeff Easel, and have him, you know, send me what they're doing so I can figure out what's going on. And I would never be able to do that if I didn't have the opportunity to meet those people in person. So that concludes my report.
I would add just a couple things. It was an excellent report, Sean. On the cybersecurity, one of the things that just struck me is the statement that it's not a matter of will your security be broken. It's just a matter of when. That we're all vulnerable, and it's going to happen at some time. And that struck me pretty hard. The other thing that many of the boards that are TRS boards also are in their own investing instead of having the two boards, Board of Investments and the TRS, as we do in Montana. And in discussion of their investments, one of the panel was on minority investments, and there is a push across the country to give social investment. I noticed some things at the university just in the last month about how the university U of M funds are invested and students becoming activated about investing in certain things like coal, so environmental issues. The other thing that I was struck with is there was a discussion on alternative investments in real estate, global allocations, hedge funds. We don't do hedge funds in Montana directly. We have some limited when it comes to currency, but we do invest in real estate. In fact, it's been a very good balancer during these hard times with public equity. And we also have global allocations, which kind of go up and down depending on where they are the funds are invested. Todd Green, one of our consultants for Kavanaugh McDonald, remember he was there just briefly with us, not I think our last meeting. He was on one of the panels as an actuary, and also Becky Gratzinger, who is a member of RVK, our consultant for the Board of Investment. She also presented. So it was interesting to see two people we're familiar with in Montana on the panels. It was a very good workshop, convention, and again, I thank you for allowing me to go.
Marilyn, how do you think it compares to the trustee workshops? Is it more helpful?
It is, except the format at this one I thought was really relaxing. They were on a stage. It wasn't, you know how when we were in Boston it was down kind of low and it was just a different atmosphere. This was on a stage, and they had big comfy chairs, and the conversation, it was almost like they were having a conversation, the panelists. Even though there were questions, it seemed more relaxed. Now, I talked to Becky Gratzinger after that and said, was it more relaxed? And she said, well, it was hard for her because the chairs were so big she didn't sit comfortably. But it seemed to contribute to this general conversation. So people weren't scripted about what they were saying for the most part. A few people were. But it was more a conversation where commonalities came up, differences were noted. But I liked the atmosphere. So, yes, I think it was a better atmosphere than Boston.
Okay, thanks. All right, so now to, tentative meeting dates. How are we? I looked at the February one, and that may be a problem for me. There's just a basketball tournament again, of course, but I have to help with it. I don't know yet, so.
Okay, Dan, did you have an issue
did.
with February?
It doesn't work for me. We were looking at, that's a Friday?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that doesn't work for me either.